They say life never quite turns out the way you expect it to. They say this, these ever-amorous Geminis, as if this makes life distinct from its opposite. But as I discovered last year, death can work in a similar fashion. When I went to meet my maker, I did wake up to a profoundly bright light. It was, however, not exactly the inviting and soothing luminosity that one would have expected to encounter standing before divinity, but rather a more stinging and burrowing sensation. As more of my senses awoke to take in my surroundings, it dawned on me that I'd not quite made it all the way. One of my angels explained to the other that I was stabilizing, though I recall it feeling like quite the opposite. At the facility, I was quite comfortable, really, but I suppose there was an obvious reason for that. You see, not long after I was introduced to the woman responsible for my betterment, would we be deeply entangled in a love affair that was altogether invigorating for me. She would intersperse our weekly sessions about my mental development with ravenous lovemaking, and I would let her. It was the nature of her attraction that was the interesting part in this entanglement. It seemed to center around the gravitational pull of the black hole so deep within the flailing spirits that lived here, as if she was aroused by the concept of the abyss. So, when I walked in on her performing an act with another of her subjects, not quite as platonic as she would later claim it to be, it came as less of a surprise. And while it did bother me, it was not for the reasons one might expect. To my mind, our encounters had always been based in the abstract, and I felt it detracted from the relationship that she felt the need to excuse the lack of exclusion in the carnal aspect. Now, I'd experienced falling out of love before, and even if this time it was more of a curiosity than a personal connection, it did make me feel altogether desolate. Weeks later, another explorer of the soul showed me that jealousy at times can have a face. He was detailing a much too personal item in his latest session with our mutual love interest, and for the first time since I came here, I had to admit defeat. It was not out of a resentment towards him, but more so a respect for the privacy and authority of the office here, that I said something to the effect of how I was less impressed with these adventures than he. Still, I know not whether that was true or false, but it was made quite evident to me that he certainly took it to be true. The next day, when the fire department came, chaos erupted in our little dimension of grief and recovery. It was likely an upsetting experience for the others, but I simply stole away to my room and waited for the anarchy to unveil its nature. It flung open doors and spread smoke everywhere. Finally, a rather large and masked figure appeared in raiments of dark and soot and grabbed me by the shoulder in a manner not infirm and escorted me out of the building at a brisk pace. Outside, we kept walking until we were well clear of the building, and I did not understand why. Up and down the twisting and turning pathways, I found myself wondering where we were going. When I eventually composed myself and turned to ask my liberator, he was not there. I did decide to try and find my way back to the others, but as I had not familiarized myself with the woods, I lost my way. Eventually, I came upon a paved road, and I found myself on a bus not long after that. "Clearview?" I asked, and the operator ignored me. Months later, when I visited her at home, it was both familiar and strange at the same time. She'd colored her hair, and it made her look younger somehow. At first, she was reluctant to let me inside, but I managed to convince her that it was me and that I was all better now. We had tea under a painted ceiling, and then we made love under a chandelier. She told me she'd never done anything like that before, which I found quite ironic, and perhaps she mistook my resulting smile to imply thoughts that I did not have. Although I know it to be the other way round, she calls me her savior. She says I had to live and die and resurrect to eventually find my way to her, and to rescue her from her most dreadful grief. In moments like these, I find myself forgetting bits and pieces from our time at the facility, and that is ultimately why I'm recording what is essentially grains of sand between my fingers. One thing I know for sure is that her feelings have changed to become much less abstract, and I in turn have experienced an altered and yet stronger sense of attraction. Anyway, I am going now, I think. And I do not know if this has been a dream or a lie, this limbo we call life, but I like it here. Its many illusions and promises of immortality all have their charm.